The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Branding, Naming Things, and Endorsements, with our presenter, John Stapleton. My name is Allison Mullen. I'm the Manager of Communications and Marketing here at Essential Skills Ontario. Before we get started, I just want to give you a few instructions. On the right-hand side of your screen is your dashboard. There you can chat with each other in the chat pane and ask questions in the question pane. If it's a technical question, I'll try to answer it and assist you as the webinar is proceeding. If it's a question pertaining to the topic, feel free to ask at any time, and John will address them at the end of the webinar as well. And if you'd like to participate on Twitter, just use the hashtag ESOWeb, which we encourage you to do so. So now to introduce our presenter. John Stapleton worked for the Ontario government in the Ministry of Community and Social Services and his predecessors for 28 years in the area of social assistance policy and operations. During his career, John was the Senior Policy Advisor to the Social Assistance Review Committee and the Minister's Advisory Group on new legislation. His more recent government work concerned the implementation of the National Child Benefit. He is Commissioner with the Ontario Soldiers Aid Commission and is a volunteer with St. Christopher's House and Wood Green Community Services of Toronto. John was Research Director for the Task Force on Modernizing Income Security for Working-Age Adults in Toronto and was the co-chair of the working group associated with this project. He is undertaking an Innovations Fellowship with the Metcalf Foundation, and he teaches public policy and is a member of the 25 in 5. So right now I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, John Stapleton.
Thanks very much, Allison. And today is about getting your name out into the policy world. How to do it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you do it badly and how you do it well, and talk about the personal policy brand of Malcolm Gladwell, who is who lived in Canada. He was actually born in England and lived in Canada for some time during his youth, and then went down to the States and has several best-selling books now, and we'll talk a little bit about them in terms of his personal brand. So I've got about 35 slides, and I'm going to go through those in about 35 minutes. So I'll spend a little less on some of the cartoons and go into other ones in a bit more depth. But as we move forward, usually the type of humor that you see about branding is some of the it's sort of the in-your-face type, the lampooning of the Madison Avenue types, and by that I mean the people who are in advertising and the strange way they're thought to think. But I'll be talking a little about some of the things that they do very well, because advertisers always have to go to the public, and they have to get to the public, as opposed to people who are in the activist or advocate world, who often see their audience as government, and if they could just get government decision makers to listen to them, then they do well. One of the things I'm going to tell you is that you always try to have a message where you're going to the public, and you use that public message to influence government, not the other way about. And government people believe that also. So anyways, part one is branding, naming things, and endorsements. So let's get right to branding and naming things. And does it really matter what we call ourselves? And the answer is absolutely yes. What we call the papers that we do, what we call what we call ourselves in our names. Most of us tend to name ourselves, if in the advocacy world, we name ourselves after means. One of the things Allison just reminded me, I'm in a group called 25 and 5, which is a means to an end. In other words, to solve 25% of poverty within 5 years. So we don't tend to name ourselves the Eradication of Poverty group. We will talk about the means to get there, just in the same way as we talk about reducing carbon emissions, and there's all sorts of groups that are around those, but they're just trying to, the outcome is to make the planet a cooler place, as opposed to reducing carbon emissions is just one of many ways to get there. So, do titles of papers and books really matter? Well, I'm going to give you a test for that. And just after we look at Malcolm Gladwell, he had 3 bestsellers, and he had 5 words in those 3 bestsellers, and that was The Tipping Point, Blink, and Outliers. So you get 3 bestsellers, and you've only used 5 words in your title. And that's very, very important. And here's what the test is. Once you've written something, or once anybody has written something, think for a second, do you think about the author and call it, for example, the Smith or the Jones Report or the Gladwell book, or do you call it by its title? And if you have a bad title, people will always talk about the author as the when they're trying to identify the book. Did you read Origins of Species, or did you read Darwin? Well, that's so famous that they have equal brand recognition. And we always need to see ourselves in every title. We're going to explore why the answer is yes, because if a title is not inviting, if you can't see yourself in the title as a member of someone who is part of that title, then you'll tend to be put off by it. But if you find the title is welcoming, hey, that's about me, I will possibly read it. So it doesn't have to be about other people. So just think of all the reports. Just look up on your wall right now and look at various different reports, and think about what you yourself call them. And remember, the acid test for failure is that you call it by the author's name as opposed to the title. And that's because authors write a lot of different things. And if they've written 15 things and everybody's calling their report, their various reports, or the Smith or the Jones report, there's no way to differentiate between them. Some of the best titles are one word. For example, a very famous advocacy piece that was done on the 80s for people with disabilities was simply called Obstacles. And the Obstacles report had a very, very long shelf life. It was not a dust magnet. People talked about obstacles for years. There was yearly reports on them. It rolls off the tongue. You can say it easily, and nobody knows any idea right now who wrote Obstacles. You could go and look it up, but they don't name it after the author. So that's always one of the keys. So in branding and naming things, let's talk about brand and what it is. It's a name, term, sign, symbol, or design, or a combination of them intended to identify goods and services of one seller or group of sellers and to differentiate them from those of other sellers. So that's very important. It's the differentiation piece and the name, its term, and symbol. So you know that anything that's going to be simple and inviting is going to be the best source, and something that's unique and distinctive is going to be the best way to do it. And another very, very important point, I just want to dwell on this for a second, is it makes sense to understand that branding is not about getting your target market to choose you over the competition. It's about getting your prospects to see you as the only one that provides a solution to their problem. And I'll give you a really good recent example. Is Apple came out with something called the iPad mini. And I can tell you the amount of the tech people, the tech reviewers that said, this is a more expensive tablet in the space that it's in. It is not as good as the Nexon. It doesn't have high definition. The camera is not as good as the larger iPad. Many people came out and panned it. And why? They were comparing it to other tablets. But Apple is tablet land. And the fact the iPad mini was not really competing with those other things. But what it was doing, it's about getting your prospects to see you as the only one that provides a solution to their problem. People look at Apple as having that solution to the problem. So the fact that it might not be as good as something else doesn't really matter all that much, and this is a perfect example of that. So none of anything that anybody says is really true. This cartoon brings this out. No, he really can't fly. No, those bad guys don't really have a ray gun. No, the cereal really isn't the best food in the whole world. No, it won't make you strong as a giant. Those things get said all the time, and people are just trying to occupy the space. And so this is where we get Colbert's sense of truthiness, as opposed to, do we have to have, are we all sitting around with white lab coats on and evaluating evidence when we think about what we're going to buy, what we're not going to buy? And then in the policy space, what ideas are we going to buy and what ideas are we going to reject? And that's all very important. So Let's go back to titles again, and that's the importance of provocative titles that allow the public to see themselves in the title or want to know more. Now, the first thing I got to tell you that in the policy space, too many titles are a complete snore or they're way too complicated. Compare, for example, here's the title of a book from the 80s. It was a Senate report, and it actually was called Responsiveness versus Accountability and Collaborative Federalism, the Canadian Experience. I still suggest to you that you have to read that about 15 times before you would start to get what this was about. But I can tell you that for years and years, everyone called this report the Bro Report. Why? Because Senator Bro was the lead author of the report. No one said, have you read Responsiveness versus Accountability and Collaborative Federalism, the Canadian Experience? No, they said, have you read Bro? So that's the branding thing, the simplicity, the identification, the idea of the symbol, and that sort of thing. So let's look at two other titles, and I'll show you one that I did. First of all, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives had one of their most successful titles, and the writer of this, named Armin Yalnizyan, said she was just, at the time, was just absolutely blown away by the response to this report, because it was far and away much more than anything else. And then trying to look at why it was, if you look at it, the rich and the rest of us, that's 100% of everybody. When I read the rich and the rest of us, I am either rich or I am the rest of us. It's an inviting title. It allows you in. It invites you in. It's part of it. I wrote an article some years ago in 2007 that I call Why Is It So Tough to Get Ahead? And of course, when I was doing the title, I Googled Why Is It So Tough to Get Ahead, because that's what I wanted to call it. But I was really sold, first of all, because there was no other title exactly like that. And B, just beside that, in the Google results, it had a psychological study that said 98% of all people think life is tough, and that it's tough to get ahead. And so this is important, because there's only 2% of people who actually think life is a cakewalk, that life is really easy. So 98% of people are going to be attracted by that title. So think about its attractive value and think about its simplicity. So the objectives of a good brand will achieve include, one, that it delivers the message clearly. So that's kind of self-explanatory. It confirms your credibility in the space. So you want that brand to be saying that you're credible, and you can build it in many different ways. A third is it connects your target prospects emotionally. You don't want necessarily to be seen as antiseptic, that you want somebody to look at what you're doing and have a positive. You want the attraction is emotional in that way. So even though evidence is supposed to be just the evidence and is not supposed to have an emotive context, your brand always has an emotive context. It motivates the buyer, and here when we're thinking of the policy space, we're thinking of you want the public that you're trying to bring your message to, whether that be on literacy, the arts, music, the environment, poverty, social policy, you name it. It's going to motivate them to want to hear from you, because you offer the answer to them. You're not competing with others. You have the answer. And it concretizes, I should say, user loyalty. So in other words, and the Apple iPad mini is a perfect example. They have the user loyalty there. People were lined up to buy their tablet on the first day, even though many others were in that space. And I could tell you there was many reviewers that reviewed the reviews afterwards, that phenomenon that was happening, saying, well, how come all these reviews came out and said that this really wasn't a very good tablet and was way overpriced for the market space it was in? But it didn't matter. People were out there. They had the brand loyalty, and they had that user loyalty to begin with. So let's see, previous. Just show you this cartoon for a second. It's a rare genetic defect. To put it bluntly, you have no brand loyalty. So you can see how cartoonists deal with the whole idea of brand loyalty and trying to take it out of its context and creating humor from that. So let's go on to endorsement for a bit. And the definition of endorsement, that's in 2 weeks from now, will be 100 years old in Webster's Dictionary, is sanction, support, or approval, semicolon, as the endorsement of a rumor, an opinion, a course, conduct. So that's what an endorsement is, just to be clear about it. And here, the humor that's usually created around endorsement is the idea of somebody doing something phony. So here we have, sorry, coach, my endorsement contract requires me to hold this can of soda at all times. And so it's making the person who is endorsing the brand, and we all want people to endorse our brand, but do we want them to do in a way that is not completely with integrity, that's done with absolute honesty, and that's usually where you get the cartoon space for this sort of thing. So why do we want endorsements? First is to have credibility. If you can, in other words, if the person who's endorsing you or the entity that's endorsing you has credibility, then you get credibility by way of association. A second is a show of strength and importance, because you want endorsement. Usually you're looking for endorsements from those who are strong and important. I was reading it was interesting. I'll give you a personal example of showing where others have more firepower. But Hugh Siegel has just written a lead article in the Literary Review of Canada that just came out this month, and he talks about a report called The Cost of Poverty, and saying that poverty costs us billions and billions of dollars. But when he was looking about who was part of that, there was a small group of us. There was 5 of us, and one of them was Don Drummond, and one was me. And let me tell you that all of the discussion that Hugh Siegel had in his report was about how Don Drummond endorsed this, and Don Drummond said that this is something that we should be concerned about. So again, somebody who has been a chief economist of a bank, who's been in the public space, is rumored to be one of the people who could possibly take over the Bank of Canada. That's who you're going to quote. You're not going to take me in that particular space. I'm a lesser light in that space, believe me. So you also want to muscle into the media space, and that's another thing that you can do if you do get endorsement, and you get endorsement in the right area, because they carry you in with it. Influence. You want to get your way. That's if you have an endorser who's a credible endorser who understands what you're trying to do and agrees with it, then it will help you to get influence, because people who are people of influence will have influence over a certain amount of the public. But even if it's 2-3%, that is a huge amount of people to have influence with. And if they say something, well, that 3% of the public or 10% of the public agrees with it, will agree with it because they think that person is a smart person, a good person, someone who gives them self-esteem, and we'll get into that in a minute about self-esteem. Another, it's not just us that thinks this. So you're out in the wilderness, you're saying something that's not maybe the conventional wisdom, but somebody who's well known endorses it and says, I agree with that, then all of a sudden it's not just us that thinks this. And we like it when people agree with us. That's very, very important for us. So, and then you can say in your argument ploy, of course, you can say, well, look at all the people who agree with us, and you start naming them all off, and that's very much how people argue. People seldom sit down and say, well, I have good evidence that's better than your evidence, and I see yours was verified by a double-blind study, and then you come back with, but ours was a randomly assigned double-blind study. People are not in conversation sitting around in lab coats. They're just sitting around in their clothes, and they tend to argue, saying, here's my point, and let me tell you all the people who agree with me, and they're all credible people. So that's part of endorsement. So here's another one. I don't care how much you're paying to endorse these shoes, get rid of them. So again, it's all the humor space and the cartoon space for endorsement is always about lack of authenticity and lack of sincerity. And believe me, the cartoons they just absolutely air out that theme over and over and over, and they are quite funny. So why do we want endorsement? first of all, the popularity of the person translates to popularity of an idea or a policy outcome. So you know if you have certain people who are crossover people, in other words, they may be actors, actresses, whatever, or stars, or people who are in those checkout counter magazines and that sort of thing. If they're known to think a certain way authentically, and that's part of what your advocacy or your activism is about, what you're trying to get into the public space, then you can trade on that. So in that way. There's then the ineffable thing about coolness and buzz and all that sort of thing. I defy anybody to try to define it. Every time I've tried to define it, it's just, it's like talking about a really trendy or Tony neighborhood, and then you say, well, what's it got that another one doesn't have? And you try to come up with the evidence, and it's just not an evidence thing. When things do well in the public advertising space, they'll say something's got mojo or something. If it's going downward, like when Apple had its mistake with its Maps application, somebody wrote an article that said, has Apple lost its mojo? Well, it's hard to get metrics for mojo. So it's just one of those things. We know it when we see it. So. And VIPs, very important people, are larger than life. Therefore, we can be larger than life if they're larger than life. So that's, again, by association. And others use them. Again, if a lot of celebrity endorsers, for example, endorse a lot of different things. And the way you usually find out about people who you'd want to be endorsing you is because they endorse something else. And that's the reason that you would want them. And VIPs, of course, are a hook. They're a memory hook. They're an everyday hook in everyday life, a way to be noticed. They're part of the referentials of everyday life, and you think, well, what does so-and-so think about something? And that will create a community of interest. So I do want to dwell a little bit on John Kenneth Galbraith's conventional wisdom, because every one of us out there who we're trying, whether it's literacy, again, poverty, environment, whatever, we are always trying to be the conventional wisdom. We want the next 100 people walking down Yonge Street, whoever they happen to be, we want them, I mean, the utopia for any of us would be that just bring out a microphone and say, what do you think government should do next? And what if everybody said, I think, well, literacy, poverty, the environment is the next big thing, and they were to sound knowledgeable about it, you'd say, wow, you're really going to the moon. Like you've really gotten to the point where things are going to start working. So in other words, it's become the conventional wisdom. We want in any of our advocacy projects, in any of the things that we're doing, we want that to become the conventional wisdom. Now, Galbraith was the one who invented the term conventional wisdom way back in the 50s, and he said it had 4 components. Comfort, the sort of thing you would say to a stranger and not be considered weird. So you say, well, nice weather if it doesn't rain. You know, if the temperature is going to be 12 in July, you can legitimately say it's going to be that it's cold. And if you say it's 12 degrees in January, you say, boy, is it ever warm. In other words, it's something you say to a stranger. You have the context right, you have the subject right, and it's something that everybody knows about. Secondly, everybody tends to agree. So it's a point where everybody agrees with it, so it's simple, it's understandable, it has an understandable frame. It fits with our view of ourselves. So here, again, I'm trying to mine the idea of simplicity, understandability, etc. But the fourth is really, in my view, the most important one, and that is it gives us greater self-esteem. Those things that we tend to believe in as a society, as groups, tend to be those things that give us greater self-esteem. I'll give you the most important example from the 19th century, and that was the origin of species, when Darwin first came out with this idea that we had all ascended from the apes, that the founding of humanity was not the Garden of Eden. It had a very low believability quotient. I can tell you that people looked at it, it was the opposite of giving them self-esteem. They felt worse about themselves because they had thought humanity is really different from the rest of the world and we were special in the universe. It took a guy by the name of Herbert Spencer to come along and reframe the whole of the origin of the species And he did it in a simple, understandable, comfortable phrase that gave everybody self-esteem, and that was survival of the fittest. Hey, wait a second. I'm fit. I'm good. I've survived. I'm better than the rest. All of a sudden, the ideas of Darwin started to become the conventional wisdom, and it was through Herbert Spencer using the phrase the survival of the fittest, a term that Darwin himself never used. So, do VIPs and celebrities help our wisdom become conventional? Is that what we want? Here I put a graphic. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Simply, it's something that can tell you exactly if you have brand equity and a name and a symbol, all the various different things that it does. And it can bring you into that space where what you are wanting, what you're trying to do in policy terms and articulate a course of action that affects other courses of action with the public, and become the conventional wisdom. It does your brand stand for simplicity, comfortability, understandability, and self-esteem. Very, very important. The same as once you have your brand and that you have your celebrity in place, the person that you're going to call on to help endorse you, you're helping them, remember. I can tell you right now that I can't remember his name, but the real Jerry Maguire, the person on whom the movie character, the Tom Cruise character, was modeled after, he said that he would not deal with any sports client unless that sports client had a charity, had a cause, or several causes that they were also championing. And when he was asked why, he said, because I can't get the kind of salary I want for somebody who is a slug, for somebody who just plays a sport and doesn't do anything else. They got to be in the community. They have to have a brand, and it's the brand for which he gets the big salaries. So that would be true of somebody like Raonic, the tennis player who's done that, and people like Sidney Crosby and others who always have standalone name charities. So, please, Dad, can I keep him? He's quiet, he doesn't eat much, and he's worth millions of dollars in endorsement deals. So here we have Snoopy out of context, and that's where the humor comes from. So, changing the world. Who are Shirley Polikoff and Ilan Specht? I just want to give everybody a little bit of comfort that you don't have to be famous in order to really influence the world. And here is where we get to the issue of self-esteem. Shirley Polikoff and Ilan Specht were both advertising executives. And Shirley Polikoff worked on the Clairol account in the 50s, and she came up with two enduring phrases. One was, only her hairdresser knows for sure, and the other one was, if I have one life to live, let me live it as a blonde. And really changed the whole way in which hair dyeing was seen, how it was understood, you know, a complete paradigm changer. And as you might expect, Ilan Specht was another person in this same space who had to change her role. She was on the L'Oreal account in 1973. She's 23 years old. She was an office junior and not somebody who was even part of all the talks. And when things were breaking down between L'Oreal and an advertising agency, they allowed this young gal to come in, and she created this campaign called Because You're Worth It and Because I'm Worth It. Well, I can tell you right now that 39 years later, in 2012, it's one of the most enduring campaigns. And why? Because it exploits the fourth and most important tenet of the conventional wisdom, is that you must, that in whatever you do, you have to give self-esteem. So this is where the self-esteem part comes in and how more powerful it can be. And remember, advertisers, unlike advocates and activists, they're going to the public, and they have to convince the public. There's no government out there that they're convincing. So they have a message that goes right to self-esteem. So were Polikoff and Specht good policy analysts? You bet they were. They really understood the policy world in terms of articulate. They were trying to get people to take a certain course of action. Now, I mean, is hair color sort of like the environment or poverty? Not really, but if you can be good at one thing and see the dynamics of what makes it good, this can be very important. You're matching the idea to the celebrity or VIP, and of course, both Specht and Polikoff were very important in terms of picking the people who are going to exemplify the one life to live it as a blonde, or yeah, there's many different women who have done over the years the I'm worth it, you're worth it campaign. So they have to be matched very carefully. So, wow, how did Hillary get the Muppets to endorse her? She must have pulled a lot of strings. Ha ha ha, there's a pun for you. And another part of the advertising humor space. So, our checklist. Do they agree with your approach? And this is we're talking about the celebrities. Do they agree with the celebrity endorser? They agree with your approach? Do they support your outcomes? Do they adhere to your methods? Do they overshadow your brand? Believe me, a lot of people would want George Clooney. I'll tell you right now, he's going to overshadow your brand. And do they endorse other things? What are those other things? Do they understand what you're doing, or do they get out and in public are awkward and don't really understand what you're up to? Do they walk the talk? And that's important. You could do that in the first place. Do they open doors for you? Do they raise dollars for you? And do they help you with government? And do they meet with you? Do they attend your events? Do they add value at every turn? Put you on or take you off the map? So there's your checklist. Do they put you in the spotlight? So if you can answer yes to all of those questions, then you know that you have the right endorsement opportunity. So what kind of residuals did you get on the endorsement deal? Taking the advertising out of context and putting it in like a Viking ship then is a good way of creating humor in this space. So the personal brand of Malcolm Gladwell. Again, here he had 3 bestsellers with 5 words. And he made his reputation on early essays like $1 Million Murray, which was a fellow who was a homeless person who cost the state $1 million, and he talked about the things that could be done with it. So so what he does, what Gladwell does, is make the unlikely comparison. And does he do it every time? The answer is yes. He draws unusual parallels that are interesting parallels, and when he does that, that's what attracts us to them. And he finds things where others saw nothing. And he says, did you see that? I didn't see it myself at first. So he doesn't treat you like a dummy. He says, I'm just like you. I don't see these things. And then I happen to see them. And he walks you through the finding that he makes. So as a personal brand and as an example, he speaks to policy forums everywhere. He's public and he's expensive. If you go to see him, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars. He does The Art of Management, for example, that comes here. He did the Liberal Party of Ontario Collingwood breakaway a couple of years ago. And he jumps. He jumps from magazine speaker to books to the web to the policy insider. And everybody knows that when you jump from Facebook into the main media, or you have something that quote unquote goes viral, then we know that somebody's jumped from one media sphere to the other sphere. And Gladwell does this all the time. So how does he do it? Well, what does he do? And from the Gladwell effect, although pitched as descriptive, Gladwell's books are essentially prescriptive. He says, trust your instincts. And in many ways, what Gladwell does, he makes things simple, he makes them comfortable, and he makes them understandable, but at every point, he gives you self-esteem. Oh, now I'm one of those people. I'm an insider now. I'm somebody who understands this just like you. He's a contemporary incarnation of a recurring figure in the American experience, one with encouraging news. You can make a difference, and you can do so in a way that gives people self-esteem. And again, following those four elements of Galbraith's conventional wisdom. He offers optimism through demystification. To understand how things work is to have control over them. In other words, you can do it. He writes well, so do others, and better. He underclaims and over-delivers. He says, I find this interesting. Maybe you will too. Did you see it? I didn't see it at first either. Has his own website where you can read everything he's published, even though many of his articles are in his books. This is really important. Give it away for free, and then people will come to you. If you don't give it away for free and allow people to read you, they can't they can't hook onto you in the first place. So if you go to Gladwell.com, you're going to see almost everything that he's, I'd say about 3/4 of everything that he's done. He views himself as a gladiator, so he's the David going up against the Goliath. That's important, and he has the personal size, and he's a short fellow, so you make that look good. But that's not enough even. So, for example, in the example of $1 Million Murray, here's a funny here: Accountants Without Borders. That's one I start to giggle every time I see it. And the other one says, can't afford to give money now. I'll hold your personal check until your next payday. Ask me for details. And this is the whole genre of homelessness cartoons, which always make out people to be like an ordinary middle-class life with their sayings and their slogans, but they're living on the street. And you'll see that genre everywhere. So Murray was really 4 stories in one, and rather than take you through it, I would just say go read it again. And if you haven't read it, read it, because he has the power law dynamics, $1 Million Murray, Rodney King, and a pollution device. And he's talking how each one are outliers in a world of where things are mostly ordinary. If you read $1 Million Murray, I would ask you simply, I'm not going to go through this graph in any great detail, but what he's done is created almost a Shakespearean comedy and a Shakespearean tragedy out of these 3 situations. He talks about in the area of chronically homeless people, heavily polluting cars, and police officers committing brutal acts. He looks at the costly managed solutions and then the less costly real solutions. In other words, let's just take homeless people and put them into homes and forget about it. It's a lot cheaper than having them out on the street, just constantly taking up police resources and hospital resources. But then he brings in the moral principles that is violated by a real solution. In other words, we don't take those easy, less costly solutions. We take costly, expensive things because of our prejudices. And then he talks about the moral principle that's upheld with a costly managed solution. So the one thing I'd like to give people if you accept homework from a webinar, is to go back, is to print out this one slide and go back and read $1 Million Murray and watch in a very Shakespearean way he has taken the tragedy and the comedy of social situations. He has the dynamics of policy and morality. So the correct, less costly policies don't get implemented. The incorrect, costly, and ineffective policies do get implemented, but moral principles are upheld by costly, ineffective solutions. So we're not going to give those homeless people housing because they don't deserve it, and they didn't stand in line the way I did in public life. But so I'm going to make sure that everything costs a lot more money. So the moral principles upheld by costly, ineffective solutions, and moral principles also are violated by cost-effective real solutions. So putting the homeless into housing and paying for it is something, well, they don't deserve it because it's worth it. They didn't go through what I did, for example. So the lament that he has is that Murray in the article dies. The bad cops go free. The good cops get useless training that they don't really need. It's only the few that need to get kicked off the force. So polluters go free, non-polluters are inconvenienced, and outliers are misunderstood. Bad policy is the order of the day, and the lesson for Gladwell, again, here's where he gives us the self-esteem, makes it simple, comfortable, understandable, and self-esteem giving. He has good, clear writing. He's unconnected stories that he connects cleverly. He has pathos, however you call it, people, drama, tragedy. He has the policy netherworld underneath, the moral principles broken and bad policies upheld. And he has the ultimate connection of humility, people, narrative, stories, history, lives lived, policy, and morality. Like, what else could you ask for? And so that personal brand becomes something that's associated with him. And again, we don't talk about, did you read Gladwell? Because did you read Gladwell could be one of anything, but people will say, did you read The Tipping Point? Did you read What the Dog Saw? Did you read Blink? Did you read, and Gladwell comes second. That is the essence of branding yourself properly. So it's the title and not you, but you're always behind it. So there we are. I think I've ended on time, about 1:40, and there's contact information both for me and for Essential Skills. So Allison, over to you.
Okay, thanks, John. That was really great. So if you have questions about the webinar for John, please type it in the question pane, and I will make sure it gets asked. John, what do you think, smaller organizations, who don't have, a ton of prowess in terms of media relations and that sort of thing, is there a role for endorsement even in smaller, more local organizations?
Yeah, I think you can do it in many different ways. You can go to people in the community. You're not necessarily going for the big prizes. I know that of many instances where smaller organizations have tried to get a big celebrity endorser, and that's going to take them to the moon. It generally doesn't. What happens is that the celebrity endorser overshadows them, and when they have something to say, the reporters all come out and they say, well, when's your next movie, and that sort of thing, and it's the last thing in the world anybody who's trying to stage these events wants to happen. So you have to think of how big are we, and then how big is the person that we would want to be part of that. So it might be a radio announcer, it might be somebody who reads the news, or a weather person or something like that, who's known to be that's looking themselves for something. And again, that's why I go back to the Jerry Maguire issue, or comment, is that people who are starting to have a public persona need to be associated with causes. They need to be associated with things that they support. If they don't, quite frankly, their public career is not going to go anywhere. So there's a mutual motivation for people to be associated with something. And of course, you're looking for something that, if you can look at something that that's a bit of a natural. In other words, the person, you have somebody who had trouble reading themselves, and that's well known, and then you bring them into the literacy area. That can really be a good way to do it, because you already have authenticity and sincerity that pre-exists. It's not something that you have to go out and prove. So I would say yes, look at anybody in your community who has a public persona, even if it's the person who's doing the traffic weather report or something like that. Those names get to be known, and because they get to be known, it's something that they're people that may fit with the size of your own organization.
And what can the organization do to, I guess, attract themselves to get an endorsement or something similar to an endorsement? Particularly, maybe an organization like Essential Skills Ontario, where we're a provincial organization, but still trying to gain traction out in the media and in the public. So, are there ways that organizations can attract themselves or endorsements to the organization?
Well, there's a real distinction to be made between just general public endorsement that is, through cards, letters, emails, and that sort of thing, and then the whole idea of having people who are well known in the community be part of that endorsement. And rather than going after those people just to sign your pledge or whatever it is, it's really important to try to work with people like that, again, because if there is a natural affinity, in other words, it's something like you get people like Valerie Pringle, for example, who had some, where there were actual mental health issues in her own family that was well known, then that's going to be a natural affinity to those organizations that are trying to promote awareness of those issues. And then it can be used that the person who is actually asking for a donation is the face of that is in that person's in that particular person's family. In other words, it's often thought that the things that we're advocating for, whether it's especially when it comes to people, the issues are that here are people that you're advocating for who haven't done as well as the rest of us, so to speak. And it's always a surprise when people say, well, hey, somebody who's really made it on their own, they have this going on in their family, or they suffered this before, and you get what's often very important in what I call secular evangelism. You know, you were down and now you've made your way out of it, and you have something to say to the world about your own difficulties. So it very much humanizes policy issues by having people who are known in the community to actually exemplify the issue as well as advocate on behalf of it.
So it's always, I guess the point is it's always easier to attract someone to your organization if they have a personal story that aligns with what you're trying to do.
Yes, or if they're known to be in this in that particular space, even if it isn't something that's part of their personal biography, it's something they've done. The worst thing that can happen is the sudden lack of authenticity, and that can happen generally happens in two different ways. One, and you saw this with Tiger Woods, where you have a particular personal brand, and then we find that you're not living that particular personal brand. So that can happen to you, and then you can find the thing that happens to you in all those cartoons that I showed, that where it becomes part of like a contractual obligation that the person does something that just reeks of inauthenticity, you know, where they're wearing the sneakers where you would not wear the sneakers, for example. So in other words, it's very important that the person or the organizations that are doing those types of endorsement and being part of getting your message out, because that's what they're doing, that they're doing so in a way that's that you've ensured yourself, first of all, that the person is living the type of life that the public understands them to be living. And it can even be bad boy stuff. I mean, you got guys, who was that guy in 2.5 Men who was, you know, if you got a bad boy image to begin with, it's not going to hurt you to keep the bad boy image. What's going to hurt you is a fall from grace. And so people didn't know something about you or didn't understand lack of authenticity between your particular set of issues and how they're representing of that. They must understand it, and then again, you have to be very cognizant that that the two of you align, because if your organization is much bigger than the endorser, then you're going to overshadow them, and they're not going to seem like a very good endorsement. And then the other side, which is even worse, is where you have the person who overshadows what it is that you're trying to do. And so we all know the ones that work very well. I think the Valerie Pringle example is one that works very, very well. She's not an overly famous person, yet at the same time is very well known, and yet can really doesn't overshadow the issue at all, because when you see her on the poster, for example, at the bus shelter or something like that, you instantly know that it's not just her as someone who's been in the media, but you also immediately know the issue, and that's really the test. You look at, I mean, George Clooney does all these things in Africa. Do you immediately see George Clooney, the actor, and think of Academy Award winner, or do you think of someone who is advocating for peace and justice in Africa? And that's you kind of see both, so it's an interesting thing. Remember, you can lose it very fast in many different ways, so it's something that once you have it, you've got to keep working at it.
And for an organization that works in policy, do you think how important is getting a sense of the political leanings of a particular maybe endorser?
If it's well known beforehand where they are, again, it's change in the public perception. Sometimes even positive change is difficult. You want your organization to be known in a particular way in the community and has a certain branding to it, and that person. It's really change that makes it difficult. You just want them to walk the same walk before. Remember, it didn't matter that Michael Jordan became an ex-basketball player. He got as many endorsements, if not more, after he played basketball. So, but everybody knew at some point he was going to retire. absolutely everybody knew that. He's going to reach a certain age. So it's the idea that you know not only the person's life, but the trajectory of their life. And if they do something outside that trajectory, then it's going to jostle, it's going to make your brand uncomfortable. But if it's something that everybody could reasonably expect to have happened in any event, then it's going to continue. This comes up in the issue of Mike Weir, who won the Masters. He will always be the first Canadian to win the Masters. He'll never ever lose that. But he started playing lesson par golf after a while, and the question is, would he actually be better off if he actually got out of the game? And there's many people who believe that as the Masters winner, his brand is much more important than that he continues to play golf at a very high level. So it's that continuity factor that really is important in terms of that ongoing relationship. And it's good to have an ongoing, long-term relationship with whoever the endorser is. And you don't have to worry if they no longer do whatever it is that they happen to be doing at the time. Remember, their name's already out there, and people do expect that people move on. They do other things, but do they do it in the same space, and do they do it with the same commitment? That's the really important part.
Mm-hmm. Now, to switch to the topic of titles, for a title to be effective, how much do you think it needs to say about the content or core message of the report or the document? So should it be more like a headline? What do you think about that?
I think it should at least relate to the material. And I'll put it this way. Try to have something provocative that includes, like with The Rich and the Rest of Us, do you know that what you're going to read about is inequality? You don't necessarily know that, but it's fair that when you start to read it, that is what it's about. So I think you need, there's a real point here in the issue of before and after the colon. You can have something that's really attractive, short, couple of words, a question that brings somebody in. But then after the colon, you get a lot more complicated and tell people what the story is about. And you can go on for 2 or 3 lines. And the reason you can is because you only want people, when they're talking about a particular report to their family or friends or even to the author of it, you want them to refer to it by that small hook that's before the colon. So I think you can get into all the weeds and the subject matter that you want after the colon. That's just telling people what the real story is about. Before the colon, as long as you're connecting with your audience, I don't think you have to have the subject matter in there at all.
Do you think there is a trend happening? I mean, is this relevant to even, policy documents and that sort of thing, of a little bit more informality in titles, or a little more?
I don't know if it's informality, as that things are very much changing, and especially when you see how they name legislation. I mean, legislation used to be the Immigration Act, the Public Welfare Act, the Education Act, for example. Now it's the How to Build Strong Communities in 10 Days and with Less Government Money and More Accountability Act. So I think what you're seeing is a move towards branding of legislation, for example. But I think you also see it in titles for almost everything, and that brings up the whole issue of taglines. McDonald's has the tagline of "I'm loving it." Tim Hortons, "You've always got time." So what the tagline does is it addresses the consumer. And in policy terms, if you have a tagline such as you have some a government employment agency, and the tagline might be, "We get people jobs." It's something that is saying, here's what we're going to do for you, or here's what you can do for yourself, is in that tagline. So there's really 3 parts of any title in a branded organization. is that you know that you're going to have your snappy title that people are going to remember and call that particular paper. For example, Essential Skills, here you've got Menial No More. I mean, it's 3 words, it's snappy, everybody understands it, and I'm sure after the colon, then you have a longer thing that tells you what that paper is about. But at some point, you'll have the branding of Essential Skills, and then you'll also have the tagline of what your organization does for people or what they can do for themselves. You always need to be telling people what they can do for themselves and what you will do for them. And Tim Hortons does it well. You know, you always got time. It's telling you that you can make a space in your day to come in and make these choices at a counter and feel good about it.
Another quick question here. Do the same rules apply to the name of an organization as to a title?
I don't think so, because in a title, you're trying to explore all sorts of different topics. You looked at Gladwell. He was trying to explore the whole idea of a tipping point, that you get to a certain point in the promotion of something or in terms of the public knowledge of it, that then things all go a certain way after a certain point. And so that's what he wanted to talk about there. He didn't want that book to be called Gladwell's book. And then Blink was the whole idea that if you develop enough expertise over your lifetime, that you can just look at something and know whether it's right, wrong, indifferent. You can guess the right answer in an inordinately high amount of time if you've put in your, I think he said something like 25,000 hours of work at some particular thing. Then you'll get to the point where you're able to do something really, really fast. So he doesn't want that to be called the Gladwell book either. He wants it to be called Blink. And so organizations, for example, will do all sorts of different work, and they'll take themselves in various directions over a period of years. And so you want that to be your anchor, and then your publications. You want them to be able to engage the public, tell what they are, and then always have that tagline that will tell them how you help them or how they can help themselves. Unfortunately or fortunately, that's what fast food and other various different large products have done for us, and so that's kind of what we expect in all of the branding world, that universe, because that's just how we've come to see those.
Okay, we're actually all out of time now, so thank you so much, John, and thank you to everyone for participating, and we hope you'll keep an eye out for the next in the series of policy webinars. So thanks again, John, and thanks everyone.
Okay then.